The war in Iran continues to rage. We have a different type of guest here for today's interview. We've been talking with a lot of traders about the market implications on a day to day basis, but let's think longer term, not what's in the news, but what's going to happen next. With us today, we have the founder, managing director of the Global Risk Intelligence and Planning Group, retired Marine Lieutenant Colonel Hal Kempfer. Hal, thank you so much for taking the time to join us today for a new conversation for this tasty audience.
Well, Chris, thanks for having me on.
Let's get right into it. When most people think of the Strait of Hormuz, they're thinking of oil shipments, energy shipments. But this choke point is really a systematic risk for the global economy. How prepared or unprepared is the Western world for a sustained closure of the Hormuz?
Well, a little prepared, but not fully prepared is probably the best way to put it. 40 years ago, Iran tried to clog up the Strait of Hormuz. There was a program where they did mining out there and they had small boats, and we had Marines on go-plats, gas and oil platforms, and we were doing patrolling out there. And that was back in the 80s. That was in the mid 80s. I didn't personally do it, but I had friends that, were heading out there and they did those deployments and stuff. So that was going on. At that time, Saudi Arabia said, this is a big vulnerability. And they built the East-West pipeline that shoots all the way across Saudi Arabia to the northern part of the Red Sea. Now, with that said, just yesterday, Iran said they're going to start targeting the Red Sea, which I thought was kind of interesting. That's specifically aimed at trying to mitigate the solution, if you will, that Saudi Arabia has, which is not a complete solution. It's got a lot of capacity, about 7 million barrels a day, but that's not something that really offsets what they're losing through the Strait of Hormuz. Then you have, other stuff, for example, down the UAE, down Fujairah, they have that pipeline that runs all the way over to goes to the Gulf of Oman. Well, not surprisingly, Iran has targeted the Fujairah area with the Gulf of Oman hitting a tanker. So there was preparation. I mean, there was a lot of thought to this, but there's a phenomenal amount of oil and a phenomenal amount of liquefied natural gas, which is absolutely critical. Pretty critical to Europe, very critical to Asia. That goes out of there, and that's all been blocked. And of course, this all follows on, the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, the Red Sea, all that area that the Houthis had basically clogged up with their anti-ship efforts in that region. So, I think we were prepared to a certain extent, but it's still tough. One thing I will say, we're not prepared, and we didn't think this. Well, I think we thought it through. I think there are a lot of folks in the Navy said, we got to invest in this, which is minesweepers. One of the really cheap, low-cost ways to clog up that strait, and keep in mind the water depth is only maybe down to 100 meters at most. That one of the ways they do that is they put in mines. Some of these are not the old mines you think of, sea mines in World War II or something, where they float out there on a chain and stuff. These are smart mines. They'll sit on the bottom. They'll wait for a sensor to trigger something based on a variety of things, and then they'll launch something up to explode. Some of them are so smart they actually launch a torpedo and hit a boat. Well, from a risk perspective, from a shipper's perspective, once that stuff's in place, you're not going to put your ship through the strait. Nobody's going to go through there because it's too uncertain. It is far too dangerous. The risk is just simply unacceptable, which clogs it up. That has immense problems. They're already shutting down oil fields in the Persian Gulf, natural gas fields. You have, not just the refineries and other things in the Gulf, but around the world that are on the receiving end, refineries and stuff are having to shut down. That's going to take a long time to recover. In fact, already they're saying it may be till latter part of 2027 before we see gas prices drop to where they were prior to the war kicking off.
Yeah, I was about to ask you, are we talking days, weeks, or months of real disruption if the Strait of Hormuz is closed? You mentioned Bab el-Mandeb, which is the strait that the Red Sea empties into the Gulf of Aden. So if you want to have the bypass for these plan Bs, that could be a potential choke point. 2027, realistically, do you think that we're going to see these supply chain disruptions through energy, fertilizer, petrochemicals for the next year and a half?
I think what they're saying with that is they'll turn it back on probably in a couple of weeks. I imagine it's going to take a while. A lot of, for lack of, I'll use a military term, attrition has to take place in around the Strait of Hormuz, basically got to take out all small boats, got to take out those midget submarines, got to take out the drones, got to take out more of the anti-ship missiles. It's just painstaking. I mean, there's been some really remarkable, well-targeted hits throughout that area to reduce the capability of the Iranians to clog that port up. But there still is a lot of stuff there to do. So it's going to take a while. I've heard optimistic stuff. They say, well, maybe in a week. I think you're looking a week, probably 2 weeks before you start seeing, regular movement through there. But then, it's the issue is, will they get fertilizer? Yeah. Okay, it's going to come back. It's going to get in there. Are they going to get that liquefied? Yes, it'll come back. It's going to get in there. The problem we have, unless, of course, this is the wild card, unless, of course, Iran gets for whatever be on the receiving end, incredibly unlucky shot, for Iran a lucky shot, and hits something that's critical in terms of liquefied natural gas production or something like that. There are critical parts of any of these plants that if you hit them, it can take a very long time to replace those parts. And there's a methodology, and the Iranians know it, by where you aim and what you hit. But what they're saying is gasoline prices, the stuff we see at the pump here, they may not settle back down to where they were before the war until literally the latter half of 2027. That gives you an idea of just this one disruption has a ripple effect across the global supply chain that doesn't settle out for a very long period of time.
That's a great word choice you use, ripple, because my next question would be how quickly could these war risk premiums ripple into the global economy? Are there places of economic insecurity that are going to be more heavily impacted by this that you have an eye on right now, maybe in Asia?
That's exactly where I'm looking. Japan, of course, is impacted heavily. South Korea is impacted heavily. Not surprisingly, President Trump has turned to both those countries today. Can you help us with this Strait of Hormuz naval escort mission? Japan, for a lot of reasons, a lot of it has to do with what we did with Japan after World War II, kind of pushing that sort of pacifist, reluctance to get involved in warfighting stuff. Well, we did a really good job. So there's a lot of political stuff they got to move through to get that point. South Korea may be more amenable to doing something like this. The Europeans, for a lot of reasons, don't want to get bogged down in this thing, but they may. But Europe gets affected some. Really, Asia gets affected more. India, China, Japan, South Korea, other countries. Now, Indonesia and Malaysia actually produce, oil, so they're not as affected as badly. But the supply chain goes, literally globally. There's stuff that goes up to Europe. Europe is not as impacted as they used to be because Europe has other sources of natural gas and oil, not the least of which from the North Sea. Norway, Britain, stuff like that produces a lot of oil and natural gas there. So, but it is big. And certainly if I'm sitting in Africa, anywhere, I'm looking at this and, and in many cases, I just came back from West Africa a few weeks ago. And when you're looking at this, you're sitting there saying, some of these economies are a little fragile in certain areas, and a massive increase in oil prices could have some significant impact across the entire sector, across every sector, but particularly in those things that they export. It can have a real impact on the cost of goods sold.
So this conflict kind of sits at the intersection of energy security and the shift from a post-World War II unipolar world to more of a multipolar world, great power competition again. Do you think that Iran's actions are accelerating the structural changes in these global power dynamics?
Well, I think the war is doing this. Iran's actions were and still are because of the war itself. The war has actually accelerated everything. What's interesting? Way back when there's a school called Thunderbird. It's a graduate school for international management. I went there back in the early 90s, and at the time, the whole talk was, oh, the end of the Cold War, multipolar world, it's all going to change. And it is interesting that multipolar world is a reality, but there is a push back to bipolar. And that bipolar world is the US and China. And so when you look at a lot of what's going on right now, you have to look at it not just a multipolar lens, but that bipolar lens, which is what is this doing for competition between the United States and China? How does this impact China? What's the overall impact of China? So, I agree that it's a multipolar world. Certainly the Europeans would be quick to say, yes, it's a multipolar world and we are a great player and stuff. And they are. But I would also say there is something bigger at play. on the global scene. And that's, China has just arisen relatively quickly in the last 20 years. They have arisen to be this great economic power, and now they're matching that with being a great military power.
So our campaign over in Iran seems to be focused on air, missile, naval, cyber ops, selective special operations, but not a large scale invasion thus far. Do you think that this limited strategy is affecting global confidence? Or in another way, do you think that avoiding occupation is making a difference to energy markets right now?
I think it actually is kind of a stabilizing thing that we're not planning some ground invasion. I think if we try to do something like what we did in Iraq in 2003, or over in Kuwait in 1991, I think the world would look with great trepidation. First off, the geography. Iran is a really big country, and they've got a lot of people, and they've got some things like, for example, in Iraq and Kuwait, you don't have a big mountain range. In Iran, you've got some really big mountain ranges, all right, which if you're moving troops and material and logistics on the ground, these become major hurdles for trying to do anything. And Tehran is well into the country. It's not near the coast or anything like that. So there's no ground invasion planned. And this is truly, it's kind of what we call fourth generation warfare. It's maneuver warfare. It's trying to do things without bogging down your forces. It's using maneuver and all sorts of somewhat asymmetric means and stuff to achieve things. And in that regard, it's done a lot. I mean, if you look at what's happened to their drones, what's happened to the ballistic missiles, one of the things is like the launchers for ballistic missiles are below 10% of what they were. I mean, I think there's like 25 ballistic missile launchers, probably 20 or less today, that are still left standing. Very smart move. Take out the launchers. You can sit with all the ballistic missiles you want, but if you can't launch them, you can't use them. And so that was a very smart move. That was a very cost-effective strategy. So there's some really interesting things that are being done, and this didn't require putting troops on the ground. Now, if we put boots on the ground, I think you're going to see raids, but the raids will also be this sort of very cost-effective strategy, if you will. Go in there, do something, destroy the confidence the Iranians have in their own system, in the IRGC, the Revolutionary Guard Corps, and everything. Take out critical capabilities, and then come out. Their Navy's virtually gone, their Air Force is gone. We're causing massive attrition with their other capabilities, and we're trying to interfere, and I think we're having some great success with their ability to command, control, and leverage their proxy terrorist network. But that's the other thing. By the way, I would be remiss if I didn't say, by the way, while you're watching Iran, you need to watch Lebanon. That's
Yes.
where you're going to see that's where you're seeing a massive ground invasion. And that's Israel going up into Lebanon with, for the first time, the full cooperation and support, from what I can tell, of the Lebanese government. This is a change, it's a sea change politically, but it says a lot about what's happening in the entire region.
Let's wind this down, perhaps bring it back to the markets here. You just mentioned that there are drone capabilities in Iran, and it seems between what we've experienced or witnessed in Eastern Europe since 2022 and now with what's happening with these FPV drones hitting US bases in the region, the shape of warfare is changing. So I'm curious, if you're, an investor in defense or tech names, how is the future of war, you say fourth generation war, going to shape defense procurement, military strategy, and maybe an American defense industrial complex that is perhaps outdated?
Drone and counter drone technologies are big. Now, I say this with a cautionary note. You got to do your due diligence. You got to do your research. All right. There's a lot of drone companies out there that advertise that they do all these things. You really got to do the research, find out what contracts do they have lined up, what products do they have available, what are the costs of those products, are they cost effective, is the Department of Defense or Department of War, are they procuring these things? Are there big contracts coming in? And with that, there are some companies, Anduril's one that comes to mind immediately, where they're doing things in drone technology, which is, truly remarkable. They're basically, they're upsetting the entire defense industrial base in some ways because they're moving. AI is doing the same thing. And by the way, a lot of the companies are doing the AI stuff, a lot of companies doing drone stuff, which I should mention are kind of intermeshed in many ways. That they are disruptors that we're seeing in the marketplace. Some of the traditional companies, for example, Boeing, Raytheon, companies like that, they're catching up in certain ways to what's going on here. They were a little slow to move over to these areas. They have some remarkable technology, obviously some huge contracts, a lot of big things that they provide, tremendous capabilities, but it's these little disruptive firms that are making fast gains. One area I would say take a hard look at, those making drone interceptors. That is a fast growth area. You saw it in Ukraine. They have become a drone interceptor manufacturing powerhouse up there. This is a cost-effective way to take out drones, and they have some really remarkable drones. We have a drone interceptor that we kind of did in cooperation with the Ukrainians called Merops. That drone, I would say, look at that drone. We're deploying it over to Persian Gulf right now. It's being used in the Middle East. It's a very cost-effective weapon. It can take out certainly the Shahed 136 and most of the Shahed line. It can even take out some of the jet-powered drones that we've seen in Ukraine and elsewhere. That's a big one right now. The big thing is with drones and counter-drone technology is capability, but also cost effectiveness. Now, I will tell you one problem, and whoever solves this, if you can figure out how to do counter drone in the domestic area, in a large urban area, without dropping drone parts on people's heads when you take them out, or a drone, you've got a remarkable technology. We haven't quite figured that out yet. Unfortunately, when you take out a drone, there's the law of gravity that kicks in and it falls, and that's a liability issue. That is hamstringing a lot of counter drone capability on the domestic side because everyone's like, should I take down that drone? And if I do take down that drone, I'm probably going to hurt, I could potentially kill somebody. So, it's a big legal issue.
Well, this has been a fascinating conversation. I know our audience greatly appreciates it. He's been retired Marine Lieutenant Colonel Hal Kempfer, currently runs the Global Risk and Intelligent Planning Group. Be sure to check him out. Obviously, if you're in Southern California, he's on ABC all the time, as my cousin let me know. Yeah. Hal, thank you so much for your service, and thanks for joining us here on Trading Trends.
All right. Thank you, Chris.